All right, guys, welcome back to the podcast.
What's up?
I was reading this book called The Untethered Soul this morning. Recommended by a friend. It's a really interesting one. But kind of the premise behind it is that, I mean, it really isn't a revolutionary book. He just took a really deep idea and put it into terms that, you know, the average man can understand. But it's kind of that, it's about like the Eastern philosophy of, what's the right way to say this? How we can separate our headspace. He talks a lot about the roommate inside your head. He said there's that voice. He said it's often like the one that's the source of most of your negative talk and things like that. And he said if you ever actually listen to it, it doesn't make a lot of sense. And we think that's us talking. In reality, that's just it's almost like a knee-jerk reaction. Our brains are just programmed to kind of chatter. And he said that when we're in a negative mood, they just chatter in a negative way. And we think that we're thinking those thoughts. And he said the reality is that that's not really us. And he said you can know that because you're able to watch it happening. He said if you kind of separate yourself, and he said almost pull your core and watch, kind of almost try to listen to your own brain. He said you can see that it's not actually like you're not the one creating those thoughts. It's like the brain just running like a tape recorder, you know. It's just static. So anyways, it's kind of an interesting idea, but
that is interesting.
Yeah, so have you read any books like that? There's a few books apparently like a similar theme, but
I've never read The Untethered Soul, no. And I'm curious, what does it mean by the untethered soul? Like in a quick little summary, what does that signify?
I think it's kind of like we were talking about yesterday. It's the idea that if you can kind of get out of the rat race in some ways, but it's if you can clear up your headspace, you're free. Like freedom is free. Like all the prisons that are actually real in life all exist in our own mind, which is kind of what Victor Frankl talked about. Have you read Man's Search for Meaning yet?
Yeah, I have actually.
Just such an amazing, like just an amazing book. If anyone that's listening has not read that, I highly recommend it. It's pretty heavy. Like it'll really rock your socks. I mean, you have to like be emotionally prepared to read that book. But when you do, I mean, the core idea of the book was that we are the shapers of our own destiny. That we are not purely subject just to. We are not subject to our emotions. We're subject to our choices. So he's in a concentration camp, and he realized, and the truth of it was that he developed more freedom of mind than those that imprisoned him, because he said no matter what they did, they couldn't get me to hate them. He's like, and that's power. I mean, that I could still love them no matter how much they tortured me, and that I was at peace with my own soul no matter what was happening externally. It's a very similar idea. It's all kind of interconnected. This ability to separate from the actual day-to-day experience and almost observe what is going on, which I've done with pain. That's a big thing too. Like if you're in a lot of pain, you can actually kind of separate out and try to watch yourself experiencing that pain, which is a really bizarre thing, but it changes the entire idea of the pain. You look at it as, oh, these are just electrical signals going from like, you know, my smashed foot up to my brain saying there's something wrong, right? And that's the way it is with a lot of our most unpleasant experiences, that we are able to, because we are autonomous beings, we're the only creature on the planet that can do this, but we can think about our own thinking. We can actually analyze what's going on upstairs. And it's a pretty crazy, honestly, it's a pretty crazy superpower. And that's really why I think we've separated ourselves from the other species on the planet, you know?
The ability to analyze our own thinking.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, because animals are just creatures of instinct. They cannot help it. They can't decide to not follow their instincts. They just can't do that. But we can. We can actually even rewrite our instincts, which is often sometimes to our downfall, right? We can create horrific addictions and bad habits and horrible mind loops that are super destructive to us and to society. On the flip end, though, we can also create really incredible things. So yeah, it's kind of interesting. It's kind of interesting.
That is very interesting, yeah.
So when you read Message from Me, did you have any takeaways from it?
Just that, well, you just talked about that we are in charge of our choices. We have power over choice, power over his decision to not hate and to love. And then also just the circumstances. I personally feel myself creating excuses or anything like that based on my own personal circumstance. And I know that's very easy to do, you know, when you say, oh, I didn't do this because I was tired. Like, I slept in because of this, and we kind of like create excuses and everything like that.
Right.
But this man was in a concentration camp and with circumstances around him that he could not control, but he really just dialed into being able to control his own emotions. And I mean, yeah, just stories from that book where he's on the train. It's been maybe like 3 years since I read it. I read it mostly on an airplane, actually.
Oh, no way.
Yeah, I spent about 13 hours on an airplane and got a lot of it finished there. But I remember stories of him being on a train, or when soldiers would come and invade the home, and just his ability to keep zen, I guess, through all of that. He just, it's just quite amazing.
Well, and I think the big misunderstanding is people tend to think, oh, he just has supernatural tranquility. He was just so like relaxed. It wasn't even like that he chose to turn off his emotions, right? It wasn't like he was repressing things. He was completely 100% experiencing everything that was happening. But I think that my favorite quote from the entire book was, between stimulus and reaction, there's a pause. Something happens to you, and right before your body reacts, we actually have a small little moment where we get to decide how that reaction goes. And every time that we create more and more control on that reaction, it gets stronger and stronger. Animals cannot do that. There is stimulus and instantaneous reaction. There is no pause. There's no, let me think about this. How do I want to react to the situation? It's just purely based on the instincts. Human beings, we can actually pause and go, someone screams at us, right? And we've talked about this before on the podcast. We can pause and go, no, I'm not going to escalate. Or we can pause and say, yes, I am going to escalate, right? We can either choose to follow our instincts, but we can pause and choose to ignore those natural instincts. And he found this amazing ability to completely forgive as things were happening to him, which is, I mean, that is so much power. The ability to have people actively torturing you and to forgive them in that moment. I mean, that is Christianity at its finest. That is self-control at its finest. That is, enlightenment at its finest, And it's kind of funny, and this is something else that's kind of fun to talk about, but the temples that build us, those horrible, horrible experiences that shape us into who we are. I mean, that's something that's very real. I mean, this guy could have never really he had theories about this way before this happened, but he found the actual power of it in Auschwitz, right? I mean, that is the ultimate refiner's fire. That is where the rubber meets the road. And things went from theory to hard practice, and he was able to prove these super profound ideas in real time because he was suffering so much. I think that's something else that people also underestimate, is that we look at suffering as something we don't want. Nobody likes suffering, but that's what it is. I mean, that suffering is absolutely where the rubber meets the road with most everything that we attempt in life. Yeah. That's what I've seen with war, World War II, a lot of heroes came out of World War II because, and a lot of them were nobodies. Very simple people who had never done anything great in their life, and all of a sudden a world war breaks out, and these people are rising out of the ranks that were farmers and simple tradesmen and nobodies. All of a sudden are rising to the top as these great war heroes. And some of them for good reasons, some for bad reasons. But have you ever seen Hacksaw Ridge, Cal?
No, I haven't.
Starring Andrew Garfield. It is extremely violent. like body parts flying everywhere, kind of violent.
Okay.
But it's about this guy who, have you ever heard of it? Do you know the synopsis behind it at all?
No.
Honestly, probably to date, it's the most inspiring movie I've ever seen.
Really? Wow.
Yeah. And I've got like other movies I probably enjoy more for artistic reasons, but this one is just, every time I watch this show, I'm just inspired to get closer to God. Like that really is my big takeaway, because this man is a total nobody. He's nothing special. And war breaks out, and he finds himself, so he's a Seventh-day Adventist? I think he's a Seventh-day Adventist. Regardless, he made a promise to God he'd never touch a weapon, but he enlists in the army. And from day one, he finds himself he almost got court-martialed. I mean, I don't want to ruin the movie for those that haven't seen it, but it's an amazing story. And this guy dealt with so much pressure, but in the end, he ends up on the battlefield and he saves so many lives.
Wow.
And I think something in the ballpark of, and this is on top of, so there's this ridge, you actually climb up this rope ladder, up this ridge and onto this plateau. And they would battle over this ridge. I mean, they're throwing bodies at it pretty much, because controlling the ridge was a huge strategic point in Japan. And it was just awful. Like, even the way they paint the movie, it's just so bad. And they start bombing the entire area because the Japanese overrun it, so the American troops bomb the area. The whole company leaves, and he stays behind to rescue the wounded.
Oh my gosh.
And for the next 3 days, he's crawling through enemy lines, dragging people through the mud, and lowering them down over this cliff. And it's cool because during the whole movie, he's just praying, like, God, help me save one more, and he keeps going back. I mean, and how this guy didn't die is absolutely supernatural, because he absolutely, I mean, if you have to watch the show, it's incredible. And the way the way that they casted it, and the way that the way they portray the experiences is really pretty incredible. But that to me is kind of where I thought, man, like that's what happens when you take a good man and put him in a hard situation. Is he finds himself, he proves him to himself. So
that's awesome. Yeah, right when you said that, I thought of this maybe not as inspirational of a movie, but I just thought of the scene in Captain America where they're testing him and toss the grenade onto the ground, and he just runs over and jumps on it, and just this nobody that, because of his heart, like, received a lot of respect and therefore was given the power and everything like that. But I don't know, it's when you put a good man in a what?
Oh, symbolically, that's really accurate. I mean, there's a lot of great guys out there, but sometimes they're hidden. They're hidden under unassuming frames, right? I mean, there's a lot of guys and the funny thing about it too is a lot of these guys that are truly kind of the heroes, they look the least like it sometimes, because they've got nothing to prove. They're not trying to stand out. They just try to do what's right, and they've got very unbreakable will. And I don't know. That is interesting. It's a similar comparison. Mm-hmm. One of my all-time favorite quotes is from Winston Churchill, and I don't know it verbatim, but it goes along the lines of, "To every man there comes a time in his life where he is figuratively tapped on the shoulder and asked to do some great thing which is unique to him and well suited to his gifts." And then he says, "What a tragedy it would be if that man found himself unprepared or unwilling for that which would have been his finest hour." And that's what I think about a lot, is that everyone gets a chance in life, and maybe even a few of them, but what I like about Victor Frankl is that in that moment when you're tapped on it, well, it's really long before that. But I think that Victor Frankl had already been nurturing these ideas in his mind about control in terrible circumstances, about choosing his response, not being a victim of circumstance. And then one day, fate came tapping on his shoulder in a way he probably never wanted or expected, and he was able to rise out of the absolute mud and became, this legend that is now quoted in every major self-help book. I swear almost half of them have have some reference to Victor Frankl's work because it was so profound. This idea that we get to choose. Stimulus and response. There's a pause somewhere there. Anyways, it's pretty cool stuff. I kind of can nerd out about that all day long, but there's something really profound about that for sure.
Oh yeah. Yeah, seriously. When did you last read Man's Search for Meaning?
It's been a minute, actually. It's been a minute.
Has it?
Yeah. I listen. I don't really read books anymore. I did this morning, actually. I read just a couple pages of The Untethered Soul, but mostly just listen to books. Yeah. What about you? What kind of stuff you reading these days?
I was just reading The Richest Man in Babylon, and gosh, it's not Acres of Diamonds, but it's Think and Grow Rich is the one I'm in right now.
Have you read that before? Think and Grow Rich?
Yeah.
That's such a good one.
It is so good. Yeah, I'm on a second round with that. Yeah. How about you? Reading?
I've always got 7 or 8 books I'm reading at a time. I can't help myself. I try not to, but it's a curse. But I have a funny kind of almost a little bit of a story on this. So when I was 13, my parents, so those that I haven't said a lot about my background in this podcast yet. So those that are listening, I came from a family of 15 biological siblings. So yes, from one mother and one father, 15 kids. I would say that things were a little tight growing up financially. The idea of, and you can't tell now, but I used to have the most crooked teeth you've ever seen in your life. It was bad. Small mouth and big old teeth, and I mean, they were all over the place. And my parents were doing some quick math and realized that 15 times $5,000 a piece it adds up in a hurry. So
wow.
Pretty much they told us, if you want braces, you better kind of figure it out yourself. So my little brother Dawson, who's just incredibly tenacious, he starts calling orthodontists and saying, hey, how can we trade work for braces? And he's like 11 at the time, right? or 12. And he just calls up a bunch of orthodontists. Most of them blew him off. And this one says, yeah. Well, he was just saying, hey, we wash windows, we mow lawns, we do this, we do this, we do this. Like, we've got a lot of different skill sets and we're happy to work. How can we trade this out? And this one orthodontist calls us back and he's like, I'm so impressed. Absolutely. And so he invited us over to his place, and he had this huge, like, just, I think he had a few acres of lawn. And so it was perfect. I think it probably took us about anywhere from 4 to 6 hours to like mow and trim and do all the work there on his place every week. But we traded it out. So all of us traded out our braces with this guy, and he paid us well for it. He was extremely fair. Shout out to Dr. Ellison. If y'all live in East Idaho, he's the guy to go to. He really did us right on that. And yeah, super generous of him. But what's funny about it is that I would plug in I had back in the old iPod Nano. That was the most amazing purchase of my entire life. I'd never got anything I was so excited about as that iPod Nano for $60. And got a cool skin on it, that was like $3, online.
Oh man.
And I plugged in my earphones and I'd put those giant like red racing earmuffs over the top of that. And so when I was mowing the lawns, I just listened to audiobooks. Well, this is another funny little bit too. My dad, when I bought this iPod, said, he's like, we can get the iPod. But the one rule is I get to choose what goes on it. And I'm like, sure, not a problem. What we didn't realize is that was going to be general conference talks, the Book of Mormon, and self-help books and classical music. So that's just about all that was on there. So growing up, it's funny because people make fun of me to this day because I love listening to opera music and classical. And I mean, just for fun, if I'm in the kitchen cooking, I'm probably listening to Italian opera or like Beethoven. It's typically one or the other. Like, okay, but you're just doing that because of that. I'm like, no, I genuinely enjoy this music. They're like, really, what's the song called? And I'm like, Prelude in C Sharp Minor by Rachmaninoff. Like, of course I know that. That's all I could listen to as a kid, right? So my dad, it's funny because I was kind of almost bitter at the time, but now looking back, he trained us up right. But long story short, whenever classical music wasn't doing it for you, which it doesn't on the lawnmower for some reason, it's just you can't really get in the zone. We had Think and Grow Rich, Rich Dad, Poor Dad, and like 2 other books. At the time, I only had a couple books. The iPod wasn't that big, so it could only hold a few different books on it at once. I listened to Think and Grow Rich, I would bet well between 10 to 20 times.
Oh my gosh. Whoa.
Just mowing lawns over and over and over and over and over and over. To the point that I remember when I was younger, I could quote probably paragraphs of it because I just heard it so many times. I mean, it was always on repeat, and I literally would just put it on repeat. And I could tell you all the stories in it. And I actually think to this day, a lot of my thoughts now trace back to those early books that I listened to over and over and over again as a kid. So much of my belief that we are shapers of our own destiny, so much of my belief that our thoughts are really important, and how the thoughts we choose to entertain are very important. Obviously, I haven't mastered any of this yet. I'm not even close. But as a kid, it was just kind of programmed in my brain. So that was a whole story and a half. But yeah, I love that book, and it definitely had a very, very large impact on my life, I think.
That's so cool. And even just thinking about that, I'm just thinking about what were the things that influenced my childhood. Like, what books was I like constantly reading, and I was, I mean, there were books that I was reading. How old were you when you were mowing lawns? Was that like 13, 14 or
12, 13, 14? Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. I remember I loved those. Have you ever read the Choose Your Own Adventure books?
Yeah, I have.
Okay. I loved those books. Like, that was practically all I read when I was, 10, 11, 12, that ish age. And I remember I would get so enthralled and just like I would have like all of my fingers in a book, just like saving pages, like, okay, I'm making this choice.
I know that feeling exactly.
If this doesn't work out, I'm going back here, and then I would get lost, and I'd just have like all of my fingers, and I'd be flipping it, just with one finger. And I really think that those books influenced my ability to make decisions.
Yeah. Well, Calvin, I'm so excited to be a dad. And half the reason is because I am going to create like little super kids.
Little super kids?
100%, right? My kids are going to learn how to swim before they can walk, right? I learned that you can teach kids perfect pitch. We're going to try that out. We're going to start putting all the goodness, all the research of the last 100 years about the psychology of parenting. I'm going to try it all out on my kids. They're going to either be really messed up or pretty awesome. So,
oh man, yeah, it's crazy how much we soak in as children. Languages too. Teach them.
Yeah, exactly.
Spanish
yeah, you can raise kids trilingual and they won't even notice.
Yeah,
I mean, they'll get mixed up a lot, which is probably why I have to speak all the languages that they know. Partly for retention on their part, and partly also because, right, if they start switching into Mandarin, I have to know what they're saying. But yeah, cool. That'd be pretty cool, actually. Show that to the neighbors. What up? My kids speak 3 languages. No, not just to show off, but also for their own good. But I don't know. Well, even look at your family. It's pretty cool how almost everyone speaks Spanish, right? Or at least passable Spanish.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
It's amazing. I mean, that is a huge advantage everywhere they go for the rest of their lives. And it's really not as big a sacrifice, I think, as some people make it out to be. You can put them into, language immersion schools. You can travel, which is really the way I'm hoping to do it. But yeah, there's a lot of easy ways to do it, I think, to give your kids a really great advantage in a lot of different ways. Perfect pitch is one that I found out. If you raise kids, you from a very young age, apparently you can just actually play videos that will show each frequency with a color. Because people that have, I've got really good pitch, but perfect pitch, they say, is like colors. Like you don't think, oh, is that a C? And I can get pretty close. I'm like, I think that's a C. And I'm like, oh, it's a D. I'm like, okay, But perfect pitch that is real perfect pitch, they just see it as a color. It's like, bing, C. Like, obviously, you don't question or hesitate. You know exactly what it is. So
that's really cool.
Apparently, you can do that as kids. You can play colors with the sound, with each note. and they learn to associate because your brain can't really absorb it at a certain age. You can't learn perfect pitch, I found out, which is kind of homework I tried.
I was just going to ask, can we do that now? Can we?
No, it's funny because your brain stops developing that part of it. Well, apparently having perfect pitch comes with some serious drawbacks too. It's pretty distracting for some people.
Huh.
Well, you ever watch any of like Charlie Puth's videos?
I have, yeah.
They're so entertaining. I don't know why. I really geek out about music stuff that way, but it's so funny because he said, yeah, the iPhone, it's an A flat. Yeah, exactly. And I think that's also distraction too. Is I've heard people that have perfect pitch. They said it can be really distracting because everything you hear, everyone's voice, you say, oh yeah, Brunson always talks in C sharp. Like, okay, and they just think of it that way. They're not trying to. They can't help it, and so all apparently can be kind of sensory overload. But at the same time, I would still choose that perfect pitch if I could. Yeah. If the choice was given to me, you bet your sweet Bippy that I'd want to have perfect pitch. So we're gonna try it out. Maybe my kids will have perfect pitch as well. So there are so many things, man. You can teach kids to read before they talk. You can teach them piano. A lot of kids are very good pianists well before they can, even communicate. Yeah. There's just so many, like children's brains are so absorbable of like so much information, but we put them in front of iPads and hit play on YouTube and we program them, I think, in sometimes the worst ways. So this is all good in theory. We'll see how I actually do as a dad, but theoretically, these kids are going to be superstars.
I learned sign language before I was able to talk. My mom's an interpreter and
I didn't realize
all of us kids.
I didn't realize that. So so that's where your sign came from.
Mm-hmm.
No way.
Yep.
See, that's crazy. See, I was actually not working and knocked on someone's door recently, and they started, they communicated they were deaf.
Yeah.
And I was like, oh, this is why. Because I think did I tell you this? I wanted to live with a deaf family.
No.
For a few months. It's on my to-do list. I just want to get that immersion and learn just the basics, at least how to communicate basically. Because I think it's another one of those things that's super valuable. But I think in terms of like doomsday, you know what I mean? Like if I was scuba diving and we needed to communicate, I could sign to Calvin and he'd know what I was saying even under the water. Yeah. All right? It's pretty cool.
It is pretty cool.
Yeah. I have like crazy scenarios. I paint my mind. I'm like, oh, but if I knew Mandarin in that scenario, I could learn Mandarin. And I'll paint like these bizarre scenarios and go, man. Well, even as a kid, I did that. I used to fantasize as a kid. I had a rampant imagination as a child.
Shoot.
And one of my like fantasies that I created in my mind was that I was that there was like some crazy space time continuum thing, and all of a sudden I was going to be transported and wake up in ancient Egypt as the Pharaoh's son. Right? This is so crazy. I've actually never told you about this before. I was going to wake up as like the Pharaoh's son, and then I would imagine, okay, how would I advance civilization really fast? Because I would be able to pull all my knowledge from the 21st century back to, 2000, or 4000 BC or whatever the year was that
something like that
they were building up ancient Mesopotamia. And it's so funny because I actually had like these crazy ideas. I'm like, okay, how would I create this sounds so funny, but this is the way my brain works. But I was like, okay, how would I create an infrastructure of highly rewarding the most brilliant minds in the area to advance science? How would I get past some of the religious hang-ups about this? And this is even like when I was a young kid, I was always thinking about this kind of stuff. But what's funny is that it led me to study a lot of random stuff. I remember thinking, first thing I need to do was find a way to, they had metal back then, so how could I create a piston and start creating steam engines? Okay, how would I even find coal? Well, they probably would have coal. I'd have to find it. I started thinking through all these different crazy scenarios, but that's what led me to a lot of my curiosity, actually. I know a lot of random stuff because I was thought, if ever the world ended, how would I know how to create, or how, like gunpowder? It was like a weird thing. I'm like, if I can create gunpowder, then I could do X, Y, and Z. And so I started researching how gunpowder is made, where it came from, and how it was first invented, and how do you create it when you're out in the wilderness, right?
Interesting. Have you read there's a book about something similar to that, something in King Arthur's court. It's a
Yeah, A Yankee in King Arthur's Court.
Yankee in King Arthur's Court.
I've actually never read the book, but that's,
you
that's
haven't?
kind of the premise of it, isn't it? I
that's
haven't
exactly
even
the
tied those
premise.
together. What was that?
Oh, dude, you'd love that book. I loved it when I read it as a kid.
And that's 100% the way I was as a kid. I would think about that all the time. What would I do if...
That's so funny. I always thought that would be so cool to be able to go back and you'd be just considered like a god. Like
exactly.
You could
Exactly.
predict the way that the stars and the eclipses were going to happen, and making gunpowder and an electric fence. Just
you'd probably get killed too. Like flip a coin. You'd probably actually die though, because people like heretic. That there is also a star. They're like, he's pointing at the sun. This guy's clearly nuts. Like,
he's crazy.
The Earth is spinning. Really? Yeah. So it's pretty crazy stuff. Well, that's about time there. Any parting thoughts, Cal?
That went by pretty quick.
It did. Yeah.
Yeah. Final thought is just the importance of always filling our minds with good works, books, classical music, everything like that. Just it starts to... I've realized that it's been a while since I've read some super solid good books, I mean, when I say that I'm currently reading Think and Grow Rich, like, it's very, very minimal. Maybe once a week I'll get in there, but just having that knowledge constantly flowing just allows our brains to like even as adults, like, our brains still soak up stuff, not as much as kids, but the things that we soak up, we're able to project and live.
Yeah.
So
100%. Yeah. I think it's so important. Well, guys, thanks for joining us. Thanks, Calvin, for those parting thoughts, and we'll see you on the next episode.
Yeah, for sure. See ya.